I'd like to recognize all the participants here with us today, the researchers, the innovators, the policymakers, and the partners in the building. Let's clap for ourselves that we made it for today. Yesterday, we set a stage as we started off our conference, and we also celebrated the 10th anniversary of ARUA. We congratulate the board for reaching to such a great milestone. We are here today to focus again on research, innovation, and AI. And to start off today's address, we are going to start with the third keynote address from Professor Vukosi.
Recording in progress.
As we welcome Professor Vukosi.
Okay. All right. Thanks for having me, and it's great to get the early morning crowd. Hopefully I'll get the energy going today. Let's just get the slides on. And okay, we'll see what that's it. All right, I'll try to keep to 25 minutes just to be able to have some time for a question or two. Unfortunately, due to my initial flight being canceled, the only flight we get back, I mean, for me to get back is today at 2 p.m. I was supposed to leave in the evening today, but then, yeah, whatever happens, happens. I'm Vukosi Marivate. I am the chair of data science at the University of Pretoria and also the director of the African Institute for Data Science and AI at the university. I run the Data Science for Social Impact group, and I wear many, many hats when it comes to AI on the African continent. But really what I do is try to bring in all of these things into one place in thinking about how do we make sure that we have a voice in these areas. I run the Data Science for Social Impact lab, where most of our work, 80 to 90% now, is at the intersection of AI and African languages. The rest is data science and society, because what you learn is that if you need to get things out there, you need to understand a lot of other pieces outside just the science. So that's why we call it data science for society. So I thought, let's start with the end, a reflection. So even with my flight mishaps, I had to make sure I come into Kampala, because if not, I would have landed sometime either early this morning, come here to give the talk, and immediately took the taxi back to the airport. And I thought that was not okay. Why? Was I had to take that picture. Right, these are hallowed grounds, so you must very much respect them, given the history of the academy on the whole continent. So the parts of being here, being able to also interact with some of our collaborators and colleagues who are based here at Makerere was very important for me. So I also came in slightly late and I missed the morning sessions so that I could walk Kampala and see really the hustle and bustle of the space. And before I got here, I was very sweaty by the time I got into this room, but it was worth it in these spaces. So going back to the minister's opening yesterday, I wanted to reflect also of, there's all these things that I can put in and say, this is my background. But ultimately, I think it's important to understand why I do wake up. I'm an African researcher who works on making language and infrastructure for everybody. My personal mission is to make sure that Africans have agency during these AI revolutions. This is not the first one. It won't be the last one. And there were so many, many, many more that have happened over the decades. And how do we make sure that Africans can make choices in these spaces? So I'm here to spread the good news. and maybe, as I said, like as a companion to some of the panels and the talks yesterday, we have been in this space. Please let us not disempower ourselves and keep on going like, no, there's these revolutions that we've been stuck and we've never seen. But we have to understand why. So language is just one way to think about the ways that people can experience systems that look like AI. It is not necessarily so. But to build natural language processing systems that do things like being able to respond to you when you ask them questions, you need a lot of data. So here's an example just of using Wikipedia as a proxy. So to build these systems, you need a lot of data in language X or Y. Wikipedia has almost 7 million articles now that are written in English. The top other African language in this space, I know the numbers will be hard to see, is actually Egyptian Arabic with 1 million. If I go down to Swahili, 80,000 articles. We're down to factors of magnitude. Yoruba, 33,000, isiZulu, 11,000. So to build just as heuristic, the systems that you see right now that you might interact with in English, the 7 million, how then do we make sure we support, for example, isiZulu or Yoruba well, when it's a fraction of data that's available in these spaces? For example, here in Sesotho, we're now under 1,000, 949. South African Isindebele used to be at 0. The government had to put in a program about 2 years ago, and now there are 250 articles. All right, so there's a reason for this. Our historically being on the continent, both thinking about colonialism and empire, the way that we interact with our languages interacts with all of this history. So you're not going to have there's the data magically being available. You need to then think about what is actually going on in society that you don't see this language development and tools that are available. I typically ask in this room, how many people for the language that they might have grown up with outside English, French, Portuguese, have a dictionary on your phone, your laptop, or your computer that you have access to? You can just raise your hand. Yeah, maybe there's some Afrikaans, probably. But outside maybe 3 hands, no one. Those tools aren't there. And as such, if you're thinking on the other side, magically, AI will happen, no. The other side then is these arguments of like, no, but then why don't we just focus on these large resource languages? Well, Ngugi tells us here that communication or language in this case carries culture, it carries geography, it carries so much more that humanity will lose when those languages die. And we have to rediscover. So even as scientists, there's a reason why you want to build on these indigenous knowledge systems going forward, both to perceive the past and to perceive the future. So the good news, Africa is blazing its own path. There's been a lot that's been done by the grassroots over the last decade or so. Our voice has to be heard in this, and you can shape these global shifts. So let's go to the future, but we have to do it together. So I'll give just a taste of some of the things that we do through the spaces that I interact with. So for example, even if you don't have a lot of data, there's ways that you can try to almost synthetically increase your data in the data sets. That's some research that we did in 2019, for example, and building that in these spaces. And you can be very practical in being able to highlight ways that we can work with South African languages. We build like a resource that allows you to do this with any texts, as long as you have access to specific resources, that you can take a piece of text, ask it to now what we call augmentation, and create more versions of that text, whether you're using synonyms or other things. But then remember, if you don't have a dictionary, how do you figure out what the synonym lists are? Right. This, for example, this library is now down to like 3,000 to 5,000 times a month that people are using these things. And we also join global efforts to do the same things. Second, African languages, most people, let's just say Africans in developing spaces, you are multilingual. And as such, there's code mixing. a lot of AI systems or machine learning systems can't really deal with mixed language, right? So how do you build that? We've been doing research in that space. You're covering my postdoc at the corner there where I'm showing up. Kudos to him, not me. In these areas of how then do we figure out how to then do work on actually processing code mixed language and generating that language and assessing if models are actually good for this. So Michelle there at the bottom, she's about to submit her PhD in that area as well, covering a number of African languages as possible. So you can work with what you have and try to find ways to improve your systems in that way. The other one is to expand data. One project we've been working on for the last 2 years, the thing that really keeps me up and gives me sleepless nights, is this project called the Africa Next Voices project. In South Africa, for this project, we are collecting 3,000 hours of speech with the transcriptions. All right. If you just think about it, of maybe for high quality, you can only record one person for 1 hour. You need to recruit 3,000 people to be able to record it and then recruit the people who are going to listen and then transcribe and then make that available. Why? So that then we can create an open resource that's available. All of this data is actually openly available for people to then go and say, we can build speech transcription systems and then do research in that area as well for our languages. And you can see again, the partners, the support that we had and the acknowledgements, how many organizations have to be involved for you to be able to do this. So you can't do it as a single person. I think you need literally armies of people to work on this project. This was just one of the venues. The other one was Kenya, same thing, 3,000 hours, a whole other team headed out for Maseno University, and then Nigeria, outside data science, Nigeria, or Equalize AI with the same type of kind of project. So ultimately, I think when we're done, it will be 12,000 hours of African speech will now be available for innovators, researchers to be able to use. Here at Makerere, they've also been doing benchmarking on how can you build now the AI models to be able to do the speech recognition and see what's actually going on. Led by a number of the team here, and we've also been collaborating with them as we're learning how then do we build good benchmarks to show people what are currently with the new data that's going to be available, how well do we do in these spaces. Then if you do some of these and now you can increase your data, maybe you can attempt to build your own language model. So going back to about 2020, we worked on this project, brought in as myself and a few research assistants and a few linguists. And we said, okay, can we gather as much Setswana data as possible and build a language model? So not an LLM in this case, so going back to 2020. And we gathered about 25 megabytes of Setswana. Just for noting, to build something like a large language model, typically there's these data sets that are about 9 petabytes. So 1,000 gigabytes is a terabyte, 1,000 terabytes is a petabyte. All right. And the 9 petabytes I'm talking about, which is Common Crawl, is mostly English. And for this project, we gathered only 25 megabytes of Setswana. And then there was another 100 megabytes that actually came from the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is they are prolific translators. And we then said, okay, let's see if we build a language model for Setswana, which is a small model. And then we compare if we then also added the Jehovah's Witnesses data, and we were able to actually successfully do this, but then you can use it for specific tasks. Things like categorization, where you can take in text and then say, oh, this has to do with business, with sports, parts of speech tagging, named entity recognition, those types of things you can do, even with the small amount of data. We trained it ourselves at the university. Later on, about 2 years ago, a student from Clemson came and said, oh, we can actually build now something bigger and build a large language model out of the data that you had initially curated, and we can get more. And this became Pula. So the first one was Pua Berta, this one, and now we have Pula, which is a large language model also for Setswana, building onto these pieces. But I'm trying to go in and say, like, can you look back at where we were going back 8 years of work to get to a point where now we can routinely build on those things? So the investments that you make a decade ago pay off now. Right? If we hadn't actually gone on and say, how do we invest in these capabilities, it would be much harder. The other side, which I've had some conversations also here with people, is then there's this big thing of, no, Africa will become this data market where people are just asked, please give us your data. We might support your languages, or this is the place people are going to annotate data to train AI. This is a challenge in many ways, one being the labor laws and human rights aspects, but then also on the other side, we need to protect our data and our people. Work out of University of Pretoria, Data Science Law Lab, and CIPIT at Strathmore University created a new license here called the Nulite Oyebode Open Data License, which puts in almost a geographic discrimination to saying we want to make sure that as these resources are being built up, these data sets are being built up, they can be released openly. But if you're coming, especially from developing countries, use them, build. If you're coming, especially from developed countries and for commercial purposes, go back and talk to the communities that built those resources to negotiate beneficiation. Africa cannot become a cheap data market. It'll be the same thing as finding gold under your house. We know what has happened. Right, so we need to figure out what do we, so these licenses are important. And here I'm telling you, Africans are leading in building up these new ways of thinking about data and AI. Let's make sure that thing. And at Lelapa, which is the company I'm a co-founder of, we did the same thing with a different one. Instead of developing and developed countries, here we did now for, it's called the ABSA-UP license. And this one says, are you African or not? Right. All of these have pros and cons, but the point is now equitable licenses are becoming available and they can be used even for universities to say, no, we want, as people are creating data for whatever field, it doesn't need to be like us in language, you can now add your library when you release your data, say we will release this under these types of licenses to encourage reuse, building across the continent or the global majority, but then tempering it and saying, no, for the people who do have a lot of means, right, they must also find out how they can then make sure they interact. And the reason also beneficiation is not set up at the beginning is that for some people, it might just be on saying like, hey, for us, for our community, it would be, how do our young people also learn to do the same things that those big countries or the big companies are doing, right? And that's what we take as a beneficiation, right? There must be that opportunity to have these conversations. Then on the other side, this is more work across ourselves in computer science and in African languages at the university, is building up playbooks. When we say as technologists, we are building technologies for people. Who are people? Right? It's very nice in science to make up a stakeholder. They're perfect, they never talk, and they're there, and then you build for them. In this case, we're actually looking inwards. And here, Dr. Chidi, who's in the African Languages Department as a research fellow in computer science, has been working on these ways to be able to answer these questions and ultimately provide guidelines for people who want to build in these areas. As I was asked to speak here about the grassroots, it comes to then touching on this part of the equation. You have to assemble armies. So 10 years ago, for many of us on the African continent who are working around AI or with machine learning, we identified that the private sector, the public sector, academia did not know what was coming. All of the pieces were very clear that there's a geopolitical storm that is going on 10 years ago. Right? For some countries, they made choices 15, 20 years ago about the technologies around AI and controlling them. And to be able to do that, you would need to have very deep research, R&D capability in these spaces. Canada, I'm thinking you're going about 20 years ago. China, probably about 25 years ago. These are not decisions that are being made in the last 3 years. So for that, people reacted from the grassroots to fill in these gaps. So one project here is Akanni Research Foundation, which we co-founded in 2019. Which then said, hey, how do we build up people who are working on African languages in these systems? And to do that, Akanni it means building together, right? So that Africans can shape and own the technological advances when it comes to language. It has 3,000 researchers distributed across the continent. You do not need to be in an official organization. You can just say, I want to work on African languages, join and work in these spaces. There's 150 plus languages, 70 plus publications that have come out of this network. To the point, if Akanni was taken as a research group or entity, it will be the most prolific research group in the whole continent. Right, and it's literally people volunteering to work together on things. And it started off bringing Africans together in these spaces where they were not finding themselves and building on. And it has built from strength to strength. This was the first research paper that came out from Akanni called, it's a seminal paper in this area now, where now, you can see how many authors there are on the working on languages. And it has gone on. It won the first Wikimedia Research Award for democratizing the internet from Wikipedia. And through that, there has been many more publications and awards that have been bestowed on Akanni, right, in this area. And I say that the story of African natural language processing is being written currently. This year in 2025 at the ACL conference, the Association of Computational Linguistics, the main conference. So if you are trying to publish in natural language processing in this area, the premier #1 place is not a journal, it's this conference. Akanni won 4 best papers this year. Right. And in this area. So having researchers affiliated with Akanni who are working in these areas actually led to those 4 best papers. And then after that, Google.org then announced a few, weeks later, after this $3 million pledged towards creating the new Akanni African Languages Hub. Right. So Akanni then spun out a section of it now that is a grant maker to provide funding for these. So there's 2 things to think about that. I think, especially being here at Arua. On one, why did that happen? What is the limitations of our current science funding mechanisms that an independent group that is completely run by volunteers has to then end up becoming its own grant maker for its constituency? Because the current ways that we work might not fit what we need. Right, that is something to really think about in these spaces. And Akanni will go through all the trials and tribulations of starting out in these things, but that's the part of how do we connect, how do we make sure and support these types of grassroots initiatives that are sitting inside our universities. I'm pretty sure inside your university, if you find people who are working on language, there's a high likelihood they're connected to Akanni in these spaces. So they're not necessarily looking like, oh, this is what the scientific organizations look like on the continent. These is completely working as a civic organization, working to push that research work. I think I was talking about this in my inaugural lecture. Unfortunately, most of this work, showing you how much we've done in this area, a lot of this work is also situated in countries, organizations where impact in science is measured primarily and narrowly by journal output. I just told you, ACL conference is the #1 venue to publish in natural language processing. But I can tell you personally, I'm not afraid to say this, I'm going to be going through my performance review for 2025 soon, and I'll be told all the conference papers I published this year do not count towards my performance. And one of them being one of those best papers. Again, are the things that we're doing connected to what is needed? Right? So all the software that we release our models, we release our data available to the ecosystem because we care. That's what I do my work for. I do not do my work for a person to read a journal. I do my work because I'm trying to solve for the problems of making language infrastructure. In this way. So we must do better here and think about how we expand this in terms of how we look at science and look at assessment in these areas. I'm telling you, people are sitting in these organizations and really feeling like you're going against the water, but you know you're correct. But you're being told, no, this is not how you're supposed to be working. We have to get these tools also in people, and some of that, sometimes the universities are not good for this. So on our side, we started a company called the Laba AI, which is a socially grounded AI company that brings resource-efficient AI from Africa to the world. And we've got like Bula Bula, which is an API for speech recognition. We built Africa's first large language model, which was in Cuba LM. As I said about the ESETU license, also we developed it inside there from our legal department. And we build these as services that are available and we keep on expanding it. And some of the reason also is to make sure Lelapa means home in Setswana, to keep those researchers in Africa. So we have building a home that we are not just people leaving the continent to go do this work, that they can work in research, private organizations on the continent. As I said, that's our Incuba LM. Lastly, you have to move the mountain after building some of these armies. Here's the growth of natural language processing research over 2019 to 2024 when it comes to the African continent. And you can see it used to be really small pre-Masakane. And then now it's completely changed where you can go to any international venue when it comes to natural language processing and say Masakane, people will know what you're talking about. And that's an African organization that then has also led to other people doing the same thing. Right. And there's still more work to be done in this area. I think we do have a new paper, I just didn't put it in the slides, that goes into this more, especially in institutions and where a lot of this research activity is coming from. The last one I wanted to talk about was the deep learning Indaba, where 2016, we came together and said, like, okay, how do we build up a organization where the vision is that I want Africans to become critical contributors, owners, and shapers. At that time, remember, we were saying we are seeing something coming and people aren't seeing it. The coming advances in AI in 2016. So the Indaba started, and then after they made the first Indaba, which was about 300 people in Johannesburg at Wits University, we started Indaba X's. Indaba X's are smaller conferences and workshops that happen per country. I think Leslie was here. When's Indaba X Uganda? Okay, next year in March. And Indaba X, I think over the last 2 years would reach 50. There will be a conference in these 2 years in 50 African countries out of 54. That is something, again, in understanding scale of this. In 2025, the Indaba, we were hosted very generously by the University of Rwanda, where we had 1,300 physical participants, coming from 300 in 2017. Right? 40% of them being women. I'll tell you right now, there's no AI big conference in the world that has 40% women. Right? Right. And that is, again, reacting to where are we on the continent? Where's our talent coming from? That's us, as you can see, really covering the scope of the continent, really building on a deep research conference that is based actually on the continent itself. So what's next? On our side, we're building up a new institute at the University of Pretoria, being able to enable breakthroughs in data science AI, solve our problems here on the continent, and then building new African futures called the African Institute for Data Science and AI, and I'll be the inaugural director. And this builds really on these communities that we've been working on. Grassroots work in AI has been part of the way that AI has been built. So you can see deep learning Indaba there, 2017. Data Science Africa started out of Nyeri at Dedan University in 2015. So they celebrated 10 years this year. I think they were in Ibadan for Data Science Africa. Next year, Data Science Africa is here in Makerere. Right, 11th year of this. And you can see spin-outs like Kipu. Kipu is another grassroots conference that was started as Latin Americans saying, we're seeing what the Africans are doing at deep learning Indaba. How do we do the same thing? Right? America's NLP looked at Masakane and said, how do we do the same thing for our languages in Latin America as well? So we can lead and be the template that people try to replicate in these spaces. What got us here won't get us there. Yes, there's community, formalization, impact of work, rising seniority, and increases of these opportunities. These opportunities, I tend to say, there's more money at the moment in African AI than Africa can absorb. We just do not have the resource. We do not have the people to absorb the funding. Unfortunately, that funding is not coming from the continent. So mobility is still a challenge. Try to move around physically, like me trying to get here. As I said, I was almost not going to be able to make it here because of a cancellation. But my team was able to figure something out so that I could be on these hallowed grounds. Immigration, visas are still a challenge in how science moves around. I talked about the funding. We need to increase the opportunities for professionals here on the continent. We need to choose our own path. It's not about replicating and saying we just want to be like that. Why do we do the science that we do? right? And then we need to do that local R&D. What you can do, fund, support local builders, research, and resources. Are you using an African LLM? Is a question that you should be asking yourself. Right? For all the investments that are currently being done all across our universities, are you using things that are built from scratch, not wrapped around from the content? Partner ethically and not extractively, science can be very extractive. There's reasons why we have problems actually interacting with those communities because they see us as being very extractive. You come in, you do your research, and you leave. Right? And then how do we amplify these African voices? So to that, thanks to all of our collaborators. As I said, we're working with Mac AI, very great center here based in Makerere. And also thank you to all of our support and funders that get us to do all of these work that we are able to do at the university, and all of my students and colleagues in the different departments across the university that work with us. And thanks for that, just to allow some questions. So, yeah, maybe we can take 2 questions. I don't know if there's a roving mic. There's one here, and then, I don't know, engineer, you might be cheating. An engineer thereafter.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very fascinating lecture. For me, as a Ghanaian linguist and as a higher education leader, it's really very revealing. Now, AI learns from language, and language also encodes power. Now, given the work that you do on African natural language processing, how do you prevent AI systems from replicating the language hierarchies that we already have on the continent? I see the work that you are doing, and in your lecture, I didn't hear anything about any Ghanaian language or from Togo or from Benin. What is it that you and I can do to change this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Vukosi, for the presentation and the wonderful work you're doing. My name is Engineer Bainamugisha. I'm the chair of the Department of Computer Science at Makerere University. I have 2 questions for you. One is, I think, linking to the keynotes yesterday. So how do we link, this great work to products that can, put people into jobs and bring money to the population? That's one question. The other question I have is, if we project 20 years ahead, I'm just looking at someone who is entering school now, they graduate in about 18 years from today. How should we reform or prepare our education system to see that we're actually building pipeline to feed into LLMs and Gen AI, which you're talking about? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so like I know they want to do the panel and not run too much over time. I'm sorry, like I will ask the organizers to share the link to the slides so that people can have access to them. I'm okay with that. Yeah, going on to that and thinking about the future, we need to increase the amount of local R&D expenditure. I tend to say this: the African Union's benchmark is 1% of GDP. No African country meets 1% of GDP spend towards R&D. I'm not talking about AI, but I'm talking in general, because if we're going to have this part of protecting ourselves against the future, research and development is where we protect ourselves against the future, that we can choose the paths that young people can take on in 20 years from now, even if we're not alive. South Africa is 0.6%. I think Namibia and Rwanda might look like they're higher because they're 0.7%, but the base of GDP is smaller. South Africa is largest in terms of quantum. So that has to increase, and that's not just going to be from governments. It has to also be from the private sector actually doing R&D on the continent. And that's where, like, why, for example, we said, okay, let's start Lilapa as one of those things to help out in that area that research-driven private sector work can actually go on. And that maybe answers also your first question, in that we need to see more ventures starting and being supported that are local. It's tough. It's very easy sometimes to sit in our ivory tower, as I said yesterday, and talk about how we posit that the technology that we're designing is actually useful in society until you actually need to put it in society. It becomes a very different kind of equation. And how, we're not saying all of academia, how do we make sure that that nice percentage is actually transferring technology into the space? Because the more you build that muscle, you then also change the systems inside your university systems to enable that to actually work. There's things I could talk about at a different conference about even the challenges we had at Lelapa in setting up and trying to engage with universities. It's a very big challenge in these spaces, and I think Prof. Mashabela actually hinted at it yesterday in these spaces, that you need to build that that muscle. You don't get it from nowhere. And on the parts of, I think it's called the tyranny of the of the languages, that yes, I might talk about Yoruba, I might talk about Swahili, but there's Ga, there's Twi, there's all these other languages that we need to think about. In Ghana, I think it's also a very interesting case because the Ghanaian government sees, if my understanding, English as the only official language. So the way that it is supported in terms of research is also very different, because now if you're saying I'm working on these languages, like, no, but the official language of the country is only English. That's what I'm saying. It's not just simply, people think, oh, it's a technical issue to solve these problems. No. You have to go back into society and say, how do we see ourselves? How do we see our languages? And at the same time, the reason I might sit at Lelapa as a company that maybe is working on 20 to 30 languages in the next few years, I, at the university, am concerned about 2,000 to 3,000 languages. How do we create the ecosystem that though every language on the continent has ways that they can choose and direct their future when it comes to digitization or linguistic development in many different ways. So for me, we are always open to work. WhatsApp, I was finishing just before I came onto the stage, was with the research at Cape Coast in Ghana, who are working at Kaya, I think it's called Kaya AI or Kaya NLP in Ghana, and say like, oh, let's collaborate on this other thing that just popped up. So that, like, you know, they are the experts in Ghana, not us, in these areas. So with that, I'm very thankful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. I wanted to stay for hours. I was going to be here until later this afternoon and then fly out in the evening. But now I have to literally get onto a taxi and get to the airport. But I'm available anytime to have a conversation about this. And I'm really very thankful to be here.
Thank you so much, Professor Marivate, for that illuminating discussion. Let's give him another round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, following our schedule for today, we are going to have our first roundtable discussion, and this will be on the topic of collaboration of networks, promoting collaborative research and innovation networks in AI. So allow me invite the moderator, Professor Kayode Oyebode, Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, to take the stage and lead our distinguished panelists. Ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Arua. Good morning, Arua partners. Good morning, Arua drivers. Good morning, Arua collaborators. And particularly as a group that I usually recognize in a forum like this, they are the early career researchers and the students. So early career researchers and students, make some noise. You see the noise they are making is different from those of ancient men, because these are the people that we are going to hand over baton to. It's a privilege for me to be with you this morning, privilege and a honor. And let me thank Arua for bringing me to Uganda for the first time. We should not lose focus. What the major theme that we are looking at is research, innovation, and artificial intelligence for Africa's transformation. But the topic we are going to delve into right now appears to be the engine room of that transformation, which is collaboration of networks. We are no longer at the point of asking if AI will reshape our world. It already is. So the urgent question that is before us is, how will Africa shape AI and how will we harness it to shape a more prosperous, healthy, and equitable Africa. It's clear, isolated efforts, however brilliant, will not suffice. Not just simple partnerships, but very deep, intentional, and strategic weaving together of our finest networks of excellence. No single institution, no matter how renowned, can tackle this frontier alone. Our strength, our unique African solution lies in our collective intellect and also our shared purpose. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have with us a stellar panel of thought leaders and practitioners who are at the forefront of building these vital collaborative bridges. They represent a diverse tapestry of networks. Each comes in with unique strengths, but all of them are united by a common purpose: to amplify Africa's voice and the agency in the global artificial intelligence arena. So therefore, colleagues, our goal in this session is to move beyond rhetorics of collaboration and to move into the pragmatics. We will explore the models that work, confront the barrier that hinder us, and then ideate the sustainable framework for the future. So without further ado, let me try and welcome our distinguished discussants. First, I want to welcome and introduce Professor Sharon Fonn. He's the co-director of the Consortium for Advanced Research and Training for Africa, CARTA. The difference between Sharon and WITS, Sharon and CARTA, Sharon and particularly Africa, is the difference between half a dozen and 6. Passionate, committed, and highly focused. So can we bring in Professor Sharon Fonn? He's going to bring in the wealth of experience in building a multidisciplinary research capacity. And I know that she has carried out extensive work in strengthening doctoral training and research ecosystem across the African continent. Let's keep on clapping for her until she sees that. She missed her flight, that's why she's coming in yesterday. Next is Professor Anthony Egeru. He's the manager for scaling and engagement at the Regional Universities Forum for Capacity Building in Agriculture, RUFORUM. I'm sure that he will be able to speak to us on how to apply AI in this very, very critical sector, which is agriculture. Professor Egeru, are you here? Next is Mr. Jim Kaketch. He's from the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, PASGR. I'm sure that he will be able to offer insights on the cross-section, intersection between AI, social sciences, and governance. Professor, Mr. Jim Kaketch, is he here? Next is Professor Margaret Jason Hutchinson from the University of Nairobi, cannot be here. So in his place, we have Professor Akanni Akinyemi. He's the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation and Development at one of the first generation universities in Nigeria, Obafemi Awolowo University. I'm sure he will be able to provide strategic, institutional, and leadership perspective. He's also a fellow of the Social Sciences Academy of Nigeria. Finally, Dr. Richard Serraj is the director of the African Initiative at the University of Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco. He is coming from a very unique private university. They don't want to copy any other university. They want to evolve on their own, the innovation that will take them to the next level. Well, we are still on time, so I will try to give at least 5 minutes to each of the discussants. Should be able to. And then thereafter, I usually want them to come and conclude based on all what other discussants have said. So I will also give them opportunity between 2 to 3 minutes, to also come and round up. I will round up, and then there'll be also time for questions, at least for discussions, about 10 minutes for us, to. So the first discussant is going to be Professor Sharon Fonn. CARTA has excelled in creating a vibrant community of public health researchers. We want to hear, in your view, what is the unique value that a networked approach brings to AI research and innovation in Africa, which individual universities' effort cannot achieve? And how can we avoid the pitfall of collaboration for collaboration's sake? But Professor Sharon Fonn has a presentation. I will allow the presentation. It's approximately 3 to 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Okay. And then I'll give you additional 2 minutes to probably weave it up and round up. So, Professor Sharon Fonn, the floor is yours.
African scholarship produces important findings, but they often remain unnoticed and underutilized. Traditional tracking of outputs is fragmented and slow, so policymakers miss local evidence, and African innovations lack visibility. CARTA responded with an AI-powered platform designed by Africans for African institutions to make research visible, accessible, and impactful. This work bridges the gap between scattered academic outputs and the real-time information needs of policymakers, universities, and funders. The challenge is that CARTA fellows have produced thousands of publications over a decade, scattered across journals and databases worldwide. Policymakers and funders lacked real-time insight into research outcomes, and no unified system existed to monitor how those research outputs aligned with sustainable development goals. Citation counts capture part of the story, but not whether research informs policy or practice. CARTA needed a tool to connect outputs to real-world use, to turn knowledge into action. Launched in 2022 by the CARTA Consortium, comprising 8 universities and 4 research institutes, the platform is an interactive AI-based system that consolidates and analyzes research outputs. Platform capabilities include natural language search, AI summaries. It has interactive dashboards to track publication trends, institutions, and top authors. It features SDG mapping, and it features a researcher directory and policy briefs. Together, these tools transform data into actionable knowledge. 2 examples illustrate its impact. In Nigeria, CARTA research on informal caregivers influenced hospital practices. And in Kenya, a study on malaria nets guided national procurement decisions. These examples showcase how CARTA research travels from lab to leadership, accelerating policy impact across Africa. Since launch, CARTA evidence has indexed over 6,500 publications by fellows, with the majority of SDG alignment in health. Platform engagement has skyrocketed. Researchers, policymakers, and funders are actively using the platform. For institutions, CARTA evidence enables real-time tracking of research productivity. It offers funders and deans evidence of capacity building returns. It facilitates interdisciplinary collaboration and mentorship. It highlights gaps, emerging strengths, and alignment with national priorities. And it supports data-informed planning proposal writing, and institutional strategy. CARTA evidence inspired CB-SITS Africa, a Pan-African system tracking research outputs and impact across multiple programs and networks. Since 2022, we've scaled from a single consortium to a continent-wide ecosystem, capturing and visualizing a wide spectrum of scientific activity and transforming how African research is tracked and translated into policy. Universities can adopt or adapt the platform for internal M&E. Policymakers can use platform insights for evidence-based decisions. Funders can invest in scalable African-led AI infrastructure. And partners can help extend features, language support, and sustainability. CARTA evidence proves Africa can lead in responsible AI for science. It bridges gaps between research, policy, and innovation. Its scaling across Africa offers a shared, smart, impact-driven ecosystem. And with your support, we can ensure African research drives African futures.
So I thought it would be important to have an idea. Doesn't work, use this. Thank you. I thought it would be important to have an idea what I was talking about before talking about why I think it works. This is one of the activities of CARTA, and I think inherent in the program or the description are a few things that I think are important about it. First of all, it was generated collectively among us. There was absolutely leadership from one person who had the creativity to see it. And of course, he is a young researcher. Someone like myself would never have even thought of this idea, intimidated by the technology, but he just ran with it. And the good thing is that the collection of all the people in CARTA were happy to put some of our money into developing it. Secondly, the advantages are shared across the network. All the institutions benefit from it. If you are the Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, you can go into the network and you can say, this is what my researchers are producing. You can do it literally with a click of a button. The other important thing about it is that the individuals benefit. So one of the things we can do with this is to profile individuals. You can look up one person's name. You can see the areas they're working in. You can see the people that they're networked with. And that person can go and look, if they look on their topic, I'm looking in malaria, who else is working in malaria in Africa? And this is a benefit to the individual, to the discipline, to the institution, and to people who want to fund credible researchers. So I think that the shared generation, the shared investment, and the shared benefit are a really important part of why this works. This work has been funded by the Wellcome Trust and by the Carnegie Corporation. And I think Carnegie was instrumental in saying, hang on, this system works in one network. We fund a number of networks. How can we extend this idea to greater number of networks? So I don't want to talk too long. And I know we're going to come back to sustainability later on, but I think it's very much about the investment that you make in your relationships that make networks work, the amount of time that you put into them, the amount of effort you make sure that everyone feels part of it and is part of it. You can't just be seen to be equitable. You must be equitable in the way that you relate across networks. And I think that that is fundamentally important. And the other thing is the ability to share. For example, CARTA has an entire curriculum aimed at institution building. This is open access on our website for anyone to use. One of the things that have happened with this particular initiative that's described here is the first thing that people came to us and said, give me your algorithms. We want to do it. And the answer has been no. You may not have our algorithms. And I was particularly taken in the earlier presentation about this idea of how you have contracting in equitable ways, and I'll be following up with them. But I think that it's important that we learn to work in a mutually beneficial way. And for me, that's the most important lesson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fonn. I know that you have highlighted the power of shared ethos and also the power of critical mass. We are going to Professor Egeru from RUFORUM. I know that RUFORUM work is deeply rooted in communities and also on tangible outcomes. And AI can sometimes feel very abstract, from soil to silicon, just like the Silicon Valley concept. So, Professor Egeru, how can collaborative networks like yours ensure that AI research is context-specific, is demand-driven, and then ultimately benefits the smallholder farmer and our local agripreneurs? And how do we bridge the gap between algorithm and the acre of land?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I don't know whether I am a humanoid or I am a human being. But one of the things that is important today is for us to recognize that we are already in an age where we cannot turn back. There are a lot of conversations on different forums of how people are worried about AI. But you see, once a child is born, you can be worried about how to raise that child, but you can only be focused on raising the child well. And so AI is already born. What role does it have to do in agriculture? We have to recognize the exponential potential of growth that it has done within the agricultural sector in the last 5 years. From a growth rate of it's growing at about 23% in the agricultural sector. And so having grown from 1.7 billion investment to 4.7 billion investment, that is phenomenal. And that is a mark that there is something that AI can do in revolutionizing agriculture. First, we need to be able to reduce the time span for resource access and resource utilization for smallholder farmers. If we invest right and do it right, then AI can help us reduce that gap. Second is resource use efficiency. Why would farmers up to now be applying fertilizer random? Why would you be interested in applying NPK? Yet your soils only need nitrogen. Yet your soils only need phosphorus or potassium. And by therefore deploying these tools, these intelligent systems, we can be able to ensure that we can increase resource use efficiency in time and in space, and therefore increase our gross margins, especially on farm and off farm. Because right now, what most of our farmers do is simply to celebrate gross revenues, but not margins. And so they don't actually account for their true cost of labor. And that reduces the overall return on investment for them, while our total factor productivity remains low. And that helps particularly for us among the smallholder farmers, what is popularly said, our smallholder farmers grow poverty. So unless we tackle and create and bring these technologies to help us reduce the rate at which our smallholder farmers grow poverty, we continue to have more smallholder farmers that are poor. And if you need and check across most of the sub-Saharan Africa, poverty is rural resident, and poverty therefore is farmer dependent. Unless we tackle the bottom low, we will continue to struggle as a continent, that we will have majority of our people who are on-farm dependent poor. And so we can use intelligent systems, AI can help us to help reduce those margins. The third issue I would like to raise is really around that AI and connecting it to the networks that with the networks, we can be able to accelerate the rate at which we can move people out of certain careers and certain places, because the service sector is growing very fast. And therefore, especially for our young people that leave the universities, this could be the right place and the right space for them to occupy and help to get them back into the sector. Being in agriculture doesn't basically mean that you have to be on farm. Agriculture can be cool, can be smart, can be attractive. What I can see and tell is that we have a couple of young people even here in Uganda. Just yesterday, this week, a young man called Gordon sold off about 83 tons of cereal. And he's deploying intelligence systems and also doing payments so that the farmers don't have to go to the bank. They can, a click of a button, they're able to receive their money. They don't see him physically, but they trust in the system and processes. Such young people that are able to work with thousands of farmers every year in a season, moving about $5 million in the economy as a single young person, is really kind of things that we need. And therefore, these kind of models can be replicated across the continent, where young people adopt technologies, democratize technology, and increase its utilization within the lower levels. One of the biggest issues which I will raise back to the colleagues that are spending most of their time in artificial intelligence, which is kind of a headache for us who are working a lot with smallholder farmers. Most of our smallholder farmers are having multiple crops on farm. They will have bananas, they will have sugarcane in the same farm, they will have in the same garden. They will have solanum in the same farm. They will have granules at the base. They will have all these multiple crops on farm. Yield estimations is really a big problem. And most of artificial intelligence systems are designed on monocrops. And therefore, predicting yield, predicting nutrient utilization on multiple crops in a small, less than 1 hectare of a farm for a smallholder farmer in our rural villages is really getting a little bit tricky. We need to try to find a way to resolve this so that we can be able to increase the appetite for artificial intelligence utilization in our rural communities. I think fundamentally that we can be able to overcome the barriers of its adoption if we can be able to make these solutions relatable to our smallholder farmers in the rural places. And finally, is really around how can we be able to drive and democratize its availability? Because right now, for many, it's about a few small things. But how can we bring more people on board? How can we create more cost African-centered artificial intelligence systems that are relatable? We can be able to remove the barriers. We can be able to remove the worries about it. I am a converted person. And so whether people talk, whether it is bad or what, we can be able to see from ecological processes, if you deal with the stochastic variables, this is one of those. You will have to overcome and live with them. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor Egeru. You have rightly told us the relevance, and we have contextualized, AI in agriculture. But I want you to prepare when you are coming in for, the concluding remarks. It is clear that in Africa, agricultural extension services is either non-existent or very weak. The agricultural extension, they are the groups of people that are supposed to distill, output of research to the farmers. And you know that in Africa, it's mainly smallholder farmers. So the thing is that you see research hanging, and then a gap, and then the farmers. And they are also disadvantaged because of the rate of literacy, particularly in Africa. You can compare, for example, in Nigeria, more than 70% is involved in agriculture. The productivity is still low. In Israel, for instance, 3.5% of people are involved in agriculture. And that's why, STI in agriculture is low. So when you are making your submission, final submission, I want you to or wrap it up with it. I'm going to governance now. Mr. Jim Kaketch. We know that PASGR, they focus on social science and governance dimensions of development. As AI systems deployed, well, as they are deployed, there are issues of ethics, bias, data sovereignty, and accountability. All this becomes very, very paramount. So what role should collaborative research networks play in developing a uniquely African framework for AI governance? And how can we ensure that social scientists and humanities scholars are not an afterthought in these predominantly tech-driven conversations? Mr. Kaketch.
Thank you so much, Moderator, for giving me the chance. I must say from the onset, I was not supposed to be here. Our executive director, that is for the Partnership of Africa Social Governance Research, Professor Fadel Ndiaye, was to be here, but due to avoidable circumstances, he was not, so I'm here. Yes, you are right. PASGR, we are so much in governance and public policy. I want to start from the premise of Professor, I think, Masibel. We talked yesterday about AI, and is one of the statements that he made that to me was so remarkable was human intelligence is much more superior than AI. Even as we talk about AI, we should take note of that and know that we are the people who drive this AI, and so we are much superior. Having said that, I want to talk about the engine, which is collaboration, and which was PASGR. Many of you have worked with us, especially the professors and the faculties. We collaboratively design a master's program in research and public policy in 13 universities in 7 countries. We again went ahead and still design a collaborative PhD program in public policy in 3 universities. That is Ibadan, Pretoria, and University of Nairobi. So you might wonder that why is it that this issue of AI is coming up, and it has been with us for so long. And I think it is timely, the discussions are prompt, and we should not shy away from discussing it. However, universities are here to generate knowledge, and you might have wondered if this knowledge we are generating, is it really making impact? Yesterday, we talked about transforming this society, the African continent. And why are we not able to do it? Professor, the Secretary General gave us pressing problems that we need to counter. And I want to tie that on the need to collaborate and to have AI help us access and accelerate these solutions for our problems. So why do we need collaborations and partnerships today? I'll only speak about 3 points, and then we'll talk again. So one is that currently we have what we call compounding public policy challenges. Professor John talked about them, equated them to economic, political, social, and even health issues, and even why we are not able to meet the SDGs. And I would say that even though policy experts have tried so much to confront these problems, what is lacking is an effective research to policy collaboration. These problems can only be tackled, we can only have long-lasting solutions when we anchor them on a partnership, on a collaborative framework that bring the actors on board, the academics, the policymakers, the researchers, including even the citizens. We are always avoiding to have them, but we know policy is there to benefit the citizens because they are the policy beneficiaries. So if we have this collaborative research to policy network that include these actors, then we are able to tackle these public problem challenges and able to come up with a long-lasting solution for our continent. 2 is collaboration will be very important, even as we bring AI, that it will enable us to maximize the impact. So when we collaborate, when we partner together as academics, as the industries, as the communities, with the policymakers as well, we are able to maximize our impact. We are able to collectively harmonize our synergies and able to ensure that we tackle this, not only experts that we are going to mobilize, but even resources as well. Together we'll pull together and able to solve all these problems that we encounter. And that is why collaboration and partnership is very important. The third point I want to talk about is the key to good governance. We are so heavy on good governance, and we have realized that governance, for government to come up with public policies that are responsive to the citizen, they must listen to their citizens. When we partner, when we collaborate, we'll be able to even bring the communities on board. We'll be able to listen to what is it that affecting them. What is it that we should do differently? We'll be able to have the academics help us to ground it in a theoretical concept and us from the practice to bring what is there in the industry so that we are able to help governments have or create or come up with good governance and policies that will be responsive to these people. And finally, we are able to align our work as the universities, as the researchers, as the communities, as the public sector, private sector, to align our work to the priorities of the government. That is always what is always missing, that we need. If we collaborate and we form formidable partnerships and network, we are able to do all this. We are able to ensure that we know where the policy window is. How do we tackle this issue? How do we bring our findings to comfort or to conform with what the government is? I think if we do all those, we'll be able to bring AI on board and accelerate our collective actions and solve what we call societal problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. You have placed a necessary spotlight on the rules of the road that we must create together. I'm coming to you, Professor Akanni, Akinyemi, Deputy Vice Chancellor at Obafemi Awolowo University. You oversee an ecosystem where much of this research will happen. So from your leadership position, what are the most significant institutional barriers, be it promotion criteria, funding models, infrastructure, that can prevent our universities from fully embracing and supporting cross-border interdisciplinary AI research networks? And what is one policy change that you will advocate in order to dismantle the barriers that we speak about? Professor Akinyemi.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And I think the moderator, who is the Vice Chancellor, already started identifying the barriers. So I think from my experience sitting as a Deputy Vice Chancellor for research in the university, there are a few barriers that I can easily identify and discuss here. First are those that are peculiar to the system where we work. Different universities with different issues around promotion. As the keynote speaker rightly mentioned, whereas his passion is different from just publication. But in most institutions, the emphasis has always been on publications and also citations in learning journals. So I think what I would suggest should change in that respect is that institution needs to look inward again and reprocess some of those promotion criteria, and also about the incentives, that we offer to researchers. Promotion criteria should not just be limited to publication and citation. We listened to the minister yesterday, and the big question is, so after the publication, after the citation, what is the impact, at the national level, at the local level? So I think institutions across Africa need to start to rethink some of those issues around promotion criteria. Beyond that, also, it's about the development of our curriculum. either at undergraduate level or at postgraduate level. I mean, for some of us from Nigeria who work in public institutions, there are too many national guidelines, that put a lot of emphasis on how they think curriculum should run, either at undergraduate or postgraduate level, which when you look into some of those things are not in the best interest, of pushing innovation, particularly in terms of AI. So in our own institution, what we'll be able to do, therefore, is to put a lot of emphasis, for the university to find a way that we develop non-curriculum opportunities for students, for researchers, for scholars. Currently, we've developed a lot of opportunities where it doesn't matter your discipline or what you do. You have other platforms, other venues where you can engage. I mean, the keynote speaker was talking about language. He's an engineer and he's working with a lot of people. So the curriculum may not really appreciate that kind of thing, in teaching in the university. So we need more than that. So our institution is therefore to invest more in on platforms that promotes non-curriculum opportunities for people to gain experience and also skills in some of those innovative issues, particularly around AI. The other issues I will also consider about barrier is about some of those interventions that we have even across many African universities. I mean, this is ARUA. ARUA has its own model. I was also privileged to interface with CARTA and again to appreciate Professor Fonn. Their own model also was different because it was co-created, co-created with some of those institutions. And the CARTA model looked into the whole spectrum, administrators, researchers, PhD students, also lecturers. There are other models that we have in many institutions. So the big problem I saw in that is to say that they don't even speak to each other, most of those models. And I think as institutions, we need to develop a clear framework in a way that some of those interventions can speak to each other. And because you have so many of those things that it will be like reinventing the wheel. I was sharing one of these African coalition for capacity strengthening on sexual and reproductive health. And it was about us starting to develop another curriculum, to teach early career. I said, no, we already have other models. We can learn from CARTA, we can learn from many other platforms that are already existing. So there's a need for coordination, so that we make sure that irrespective of the intervention, we're able to come together and make sure that it makes maximum benefits for the students. For the policy change, as Prof mentioned, I think for AI particularly, we need to identify, the low-hanging fruits. So in Nigeria, for instance, I know the National University Commission started by, I think it was like a word of advice that universities should develop either curriculum level training or other form of training to promote AI. Then they went further that universities should develop policy, that supports AI. So I think every university must be able, first to develop, to have a policy on AI. And that policy must be in such that not just about the use of AI, also in terms of how that also will impact, the system. We need to develop that. I think I want to stop on that and wait for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Akinyemi. Finally, let me come to Dr. Richard Serraj from Mohammed VI Polytechnic. Your initiative spans the entire continent. And I see a key challenge there that we face is mainly asymmetry in terms of resources and capacity between the different regions of Africa. So, Dr. Richard Serraj, how can collaborative networks be deliberately structured to be truly Pan-African, ensuring that they are not dominated by few hubs or instead engines of equitable capacity building and resource sharing across the African continent.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And by the way, my name is Rachid, not Richard. It's just a small difference, but anyway, the quick answer to that in one word, it's been said already yesterday, and we've heard about it. It's industry, private sector. And it's always the elephant in the room in this kind of discussions. We cannot have all this transformation in Africa just in public sector. But let me back up a little bit. I want you just to imagine with me, picture a woman somewhere in Kenya, farmer, using her phone to predict an abiotic stress like drought or disease to manage her crop and also providing a service to the community. That's a picture. A second picture, a midwife somewhere in a rural area in Senegal using an app to diagnose a condition that would take days of traveling. A young lady somewhere in rural area in Morocco developing an app to resolve an issue developed in the community. And this is not fiction. This is actually part of work we are doing. I just wanted to start from practical examples to show that AI is not just about, these concepts, fuzzy. It's also about people's livelihood. I think it's been stressed from day one. And this is the first example I'm going to mention. UM6P, University of Mohammed VI Polytechnic, it's basically a baby among African universities. We're 80 years old. But we started with the thinking of leapfrogging, directly from being users of technology into co-creation and impact. So those are our keywords. Now, how do we do that? We started right from the beginning by something called the II movement. And the II movement is a partnership that involves many organizations across Africa and also with UNESCO. We're working with UN organizations. And the work, for instance, it has focused on women. We have this flagship project I want to mention quickly. It's called the African Women in Tech and AI. Started, of course, with the batches every year. And the examples I just given in the beginning, these are actually examples coming from that project. And so we've developed so far about 127 ladies that we trained across 28 countries. And we're not stopping there. Our goal is to reach 1,000 ladies by 2027. And it's not just about training in knowledge. Focus is actually train, incubate, build, and connect. Because if you don't incubate those ideas into real enterprises, it just stays as concept. Of course, it's not always easy and success, but that's our bet, is to connect the 3 or the 4 models, the training, incubation, and scaling. So this is based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is basically betting on people. We bet on our people and mostly on women because we know the role of women and all across Africa. The second pillar is actually forging a new global partnership model because we are not playing this ground. It has been said, AI is now becoming global and it's being developed across the globe. So we have to make sure that Africa sits around that table. So the global partnership. And the third pillar is basically to create the ecosystem for scaling. Because it's very easy to develop pilots. But as someone would say, pilots don't scale, don't fail, but pilots don't scale. So we need to move beyond pilots and small success stories. And the key for that is basically creating that ecosystem for scaling and for entrepreneurship. The one example I would like to highlight, some of you who visited UM6P know that already, and that's actually a good model that's innovative in terms of training. For instance, we have these 2 schools. One is called UCode, and the second is called 1337. These are completely innovative. So no diploma, no certificate. The kids come there, one purpose, decode. And they spend a couple of years, most of them get employed actually before finishing. And this has been very successful. Now, building also what my friend Anthony Egeru has said about agriculture, it is a key issue also for us because it's about food security in the continent. We are developing now, we're happy to announce actually very soon, the opening our first digital farming school. And this is done in partnership with the NPHB in Yamoussoukro in Côte d'Ivoire. So this is the first school ever in Africa where kids are going to be trained with this concept I just mentioned for the UCODE 1337, but with application in agriculture. So actually, to sum this up, our motto is learning by doing. We don't believe too much in teaching concepts because concepts just stay as that. We teach practical examples and teach people how to get things done. And this is our experience with the digital farming school. The second pillar I mentioned is forging the global partnership. So how do we do that? For instance, we're all using ChatGPT or DeepSeek or whatever. So we taking the initiative actually of building our own partnership with OpenAI. So we have one of the biggest data centers in the continent, and we're making sure that we co-develop the algorithm and also the data. It has been said, but I think we need to emphasize that again and again. Africa has to stay in control of its data sets and being able to develop that and the capacity for running that. So that's what we're doing. We're training the people to the algorithm, as I mentioned, and not only in isolation, but we are working also with these global partnerships with Europe and US and of course across Africa. And the third pillar, as I mentioned, for scaling, we believe from the beginning in innovation and entrepreneurship. So we have this ecosystem called StartGate, which is basically very dynamic system for incubating, acceleration, and we are connecting that, of course, to the whole network across Africa. I will keep it there for now, and I submit with that. Back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Serraj. Excellent vision, excellent work. We are running out of time, but I want you to make concluding remarks. 1 minute or thereabout from Professor Fonn.
One of the questions that we were asked to address on the panel was the issue of sustainability. And I wanted to reflect on some excellent contributions from my colleagues. We talk about the lack of a good ecosystem. And part of that problem is because at every level, Africa isn't making the interventions and the investments that Africa needs to be making in Africa. Our governments don't necessarily take African research as seriously as they take research from elsewhere. When they go for advice, they go to international agencies. They don't come to us. We have to change that. And we change it with the mindset, and then we change it with investment. And in particular relationship to the project that I was putting forward, for that to be sustainable beyond funders, which was the question we were asked to address, is that we can only imagine selling this on a subscription model. The benefits to everyone are clear. But why is it that African universities don't have a secure income enough to invest in an African developed solution? And those are the kinds of problems that we need to start addressing. We need to start valuing ourselves, and we need to start networking with each other across the continent. And we need to be putting our money where our mouth is. And it's not true that Africa doesn't have money. It's just that we're not necessarily investing that money in the best way that we could be.
Thank you. Next,
thank you very much. And because it is easy for governments and MPs and ministers to account for a road than to account for the product of science that is somewhere lost, that can't be seen. So the chairperson of the session asked me to address an issue around extension services. So within RUFORUM and the network of universities, but also together with AFAS, EAF, the East African Farmers Federation, also working together with the CGR and FARA. There is a consortium now called the IRIS, African Agricultural Research and Education Institutions, coming together and coalescing as part of the broader network of networks. And so within this, we have been working towards putting out what we call the innovation transfer partners. And these are largely young people that are educated, that have their master's or undergraduate degrees, but are running enterprises. And those, we are investing in them to be the champions for agricultural extension and advisory services, last mile, but also now beginning to talk a lot about first mile. And so what we have seen over the last, say, 6 months when we commissioned some of this is that within just 6 months, these young people have done about 120,000 farmers reach. And they're delivering what we call bundled services, inputs, finance, insurance, and connecting farmers to markets. What we can be able to see is that these young people are turning in not only profitability, but they are also assisting farmers more directly with the extension services. We feel this is more sustainable because what had been previously advocated, say by the World Bank of the private sector-led extension, but had not thought through what that private sector-led extension looks like, I think we are trying to decode that. And we are deploying our brains, our African young people, to lead the charge for that so that it is successful. Finally, it's really around the issue that we continue to design and try to innovate more innovative solutions around how can we be able to deliver extension and advisory services that are more inclusive. What we can be able to see is that we are deploying what we call digital connectors, utilizing technology, utilizing mobile phones and applications to be able to connect farmers and more directly. What is interesting out of the digital connector experience is that the female digital connectors have been more successful than the males. I don't know why, but we want to try to take time to understand why are the female digital connectors more active, more proficient, more liked on farm and in the rural places by both male and female farmers. That is something, it's a kudos to the females, but it's something that we would like to try to understand. Thank you very much.
Next.
Thank you. One of the most important actors that we are missing in this collaboration partnership networks is the political players. When we want to effectively inform policy and make policy changes, as he was saying, we must make sure that we bring the politicians or political players among us as partners, as collaborators. Public policy process making is very messy and complex. And as you all know, it is inherently political. And it's full of actors who are competing with interest to influence policy. Among these actors is the politician. They always bulldoze. So I would want to wish that as we partner with Arua, as Arua try to network and collaborate, let us ensure that we have members of parliament even among us, because these are the key actors. When we want to take these things to parliament to enact policies, they will be there. And if they do not work with us, they will disown us. So let's ensure that we partner with them, we collaborate with them at stages, not only when we are taking the findings with them, no. Even at the design level, we should be able to tell them, this is what we are doing, let's work together so that when we reach that process where we are implementing, where we are disseminating, no. So ownership of to be taken care of by them. Number two that I want to say is even as we partner, let's avoid sector-specific partnership or collaborations. I know it's a good thing. When we want to do something on energy, then we'll just come around and look for all people in that energy sector and partner and collaborate. But that segmentation does not take cognizance of the nuances in public policy process. We also need to bring even sociologists in energy issue, people dealing with water, environmentalists, so that we do that what we call interdisciplinary in our collaboration. And with that, we'll be able to effect effective policy outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 1 minute each.
Thank you. Just 2 points to say that the knowledge economy put a lot of responsibility on the university. So the first point I want to raise is that our university needs to provide more opportunities for people who are creative, particularly when you look into the growth of fintech across Africa. You see that a lot came from the university. But those universities don't make benefits from such because many of those fintechs were based on efforts of those students who on their own made those things to happen. Unlike in other places, like University of Waterloo, for instance, where those guys who developed Facebook started, from a department, and they saw, the contribution of the university to what they do. So for every money they made, they return back to the university. So the university needs to think through this and make sure that some of those innovations that the university also provided a platform so that as they continue to make economic benefit, the university also can continue to benefit and continue to expand whatever thing that we do. The second one was what we just discussed, that the university needs to look into some of those policy issues, particularly the reward system. How do we celebrate excellence? Must excellence just be based on publication and citation? As we've heard from the keynote speaker, I think we need to think inward and see how university continue to, reward people who are innovative, either as a student, postgraduate, or even as faculty. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Dr. Serraj.
In few words, actually, I'd like to echo what Her Excellency, the Minister of Science and Technology, yesterday challenged us all. And my take on that is basically, we've heard it all. We, and this is the way conferences go. But to make this vision real, and AI in Africa, we need more than speeches. We need collective action. And I think that's the challenge I've heard personally from Her Excellency. The fact that ARU has organized this, I think it's really a great moment. It's a strategic moment for Africa. It's an opportunity. We need to think seriously now, then what? What's next step? So my call of action would be to think about establishing an African AI Research and Innovation Alliance, seriously, that will basically allow the synergy, because nobody will do this alone. No institution across the continent, no matter how good we are, can do this on its own. And I think ARU, assembling some of the best universities in the continent, can at least take the initiative. So that's my call of action. We need to involve university leaders, open the curricula, share our research infrastructure. I mentioned, for instance, what we do at UM6B, and it is dedicated to Africa. It's not just for Morocco. We need to involve investors and private sector. If we are not succeeding in attracting private sector, I don't think we're going to move very fast or very far. So we need to make sure that we bring the private sector around the table and demonstrating that AI is the greatest growth opportunity for this decade in this continent. That's not just charity. I mean, it's basically business for them. And the language of the private sector. They only understand the language of business. And finally, it's been mentioned, policymakers. I think that science policy dialogue has to be and maintained. It's really a great opportunity yesterday to have the minister and the challenge. But I think we need to raise to that challenge and come up with a clear pathway or a roadmap for the next steps. Thank you.
Can we appreciate the panelists? I'm sure that the discourse will go beyond the four corners of this room. We are out of time. Only two interventions. One from my right. I see 6 or 7 here. Only one, and only one from the other side. We can continue the discourse thereafter. Yes. I need a lady on this side. I'm a generally sensitive person.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and all the panelists.
I see a lady there. Yes, you are the second.
I just have 4 questions, but I will reduce it to 3.
4.
I just reduce it to 2.
Let's know who you are directing it to. the chairman of the board gave us an outline. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yesterday was 4. Now we have 5.
Okay, let me rate it to Professor.
Number who?
Number 4. That's Professor Akinyemi. Yes.
Number 4.
My name is Victor Okori from Obafemi Awolowo University. Now, Professor Akinyemi, while you were speaking, you made mention of giving back and people giving back to the system. I just want to ask, and any other person may equally take on the question, because we are thinking that collaboration, as our moderator said, should not just be for collaboration's sake. Is there any experience with respect to percentage when a particular collaboration has led to product, patent? What percentage have we seen to have worked, maybe in other sectors? And to my very good friend who is now in extension, talking private extension, that's number 2. I'm also an agricultural extension agent by training and practice. Now, the coming of private extension, we are producing information and we get it into the market. What exactly can we be said to all those people, perhaps the farmers who supply the information, because it's a kind of co-creation. So what we owe them? Do we give them anything apart from do no harm when we collect the data and we process it into now a patent product? Are farmers part of the owners in the system?
Let me stop here. Thank you. Let's stop there. There's a lady there. Yes. Give it to the lady there. My glasses is...
Thank you very much. My name is Agnes Nare from Women's University in Africa in Zimbabwe. From the discussions that we have had, we've been talking about collaboration. However, I have one key realization that stands out. There is still a group that remains likely marginalized, and that is people who are blind and the visually impaired. As we continue to push for inclusivity and equity across our institutions, it is vital that we also consider accessibility in education, research, and innovation, being inclusive of the people that I have mentioned. Thank you.
Can we allow only Fonn just to respond to that second question? Okay. I think it's 4 and 5, I think. Oh, no, 3 or 2. 2 and 4. Short answer. No story.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Okori. And so the point is to say that if we continue, particularly many public universities in Africa, if we continue with our orientation of just teaching and then you allow innovators to do their own thing, it may end up that your investment is 0. So the return on 0 is likely also to be 0. But when you look into the model that we have now, consider, for instance, PAMPay. PAMPay came from OAU. Okay, so what PAMPay can do for us as a university now is just to give back if it feels like. Because when it was doing all of those things, there was no platform for any discussion, for any negotiation. But for a 21st century university, I think the issue of commercialization therefore becomes key. And head of institution needs to sit and see. It's not just a simple talk, it's a whole lot of processing. That if you want to promote innovation, then the platform must be there. Then the whole issues around commercialization, you need to sit with it and discuss, either with researchers, either with students. So in that way, when there's any product, then you can make claim, about issues around percentages. But if we continue the way we just teach and students go and do their own thing, we don't have any moral right, to start discussing issues around commercialization with them.
Thank you very much. 2 concerning agricultural extension.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the key issue is that most of the processes around knowledge co-creation are complex processes. But most of the African knowledge is not yet at proprietary level knowledge. And that raises the question of how you can be able to apportion benefits of co-created knowledge, which is not proprietary knowledge. And because it's not proprietary knowledge, it's therefore difficult for you to say, this is how I can be able to trade it. But what then do we owe our farmers that work with us to co-create this knowledge is really that we have to demonstrate to them that there is greater value creation in the knowledge co-creation that translates to better livelihood, better resilience, and a better hope ahead of them that they can be able to see. Not a promise, because we are living here on earth. It is not something mystical about heaven. Here on earth, we have to demonstrate that it's real. They should be able to see better yields on farm, income in the pocket. They are walking to the bank happy. Not some mystical figure. No, not heaven. Here on earth. They must realize heaven here on earth. Thank you very much.
Sharon.
In response to the question, I just want to acknowledge the disability movement, who coined the phrase, nothing about us without us. And I think that the potential for AI, particularly, for example, of people who can't see well, and the ability of the large language learning models and the language things that we had in the beginning, this morning's session, created a lot of opportunities to increase access for people with disability to knowledge, to learning, to participation. And I think that it's really important that we keep this in mind and keep this front and center of how we democratize, to borrow your term, artificial intelligence. And thank you for that question.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. I round up. Collaboration, non-negotiable. Governance, fundamental. Our institution must adapt. Equity should be our goal. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I want to quote from a Nigerian author and poet. His name is Chinua Achebe. He wrote, beginning of quote, "We cannot tread our path in the world without the light of the moon from others. In this age, this AI age, no university is an island. We all need each other's light." Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for
Thank you so much, Professor Kayode, and for leading our panel discussion today, and all the panelists who've done as well. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are going to have a photo moment here with the panelists. As we're having that, allow me give you guidance to our next session. We're going to have our third parallel session that is going to happen today. And it's going to happen in 15 minutes. This means we are going to have our coffee break in just 15 minutes. And immediately after that, we shall go out to the breakout sessions. And these are going to happen in the following rooms. Parallel session 3.1, application of AI in research and innovation in African research universities. This is going to be chaired by Dr. Rachel Dungu in the main auditorium. So if you registered for 3.1, session number 3.1, you're going to stay here in the main hall, auditorium. Parallel session 3.2, it's happening in seminar room 01. Please note that this was initially assigned to council room. However, it has been shifted to seminar room 01. That is on the first floor as you move out and take the lift on your right. Parallel session 3.3, it's happening in the Vice Chancellor's boardroom, and that will be chaired by Professor Adebowale. Parallel session 3.4, it's happening in the Senior Common Room, chaired by Professor Helen Nambalira. The Senior Common Room is just At the back, you take your right, and that is the senior common room. Then parallel session 3.5, this is going to happen in council room. Chaired, it's going to happen in council room. Please note, it has been shifted from seminar room 01 to council room. Then parallel session, the special session 3, it's going to happen in seminar room 02. Ladies and gentlemen, let's join together for the coffee break. Thank you so much.